The turpentine was the first thing. Before the smoke, before the heat, before the high, thin scream of the mistress from the second-floor window, there was the smell of pine resin, sharp and clean as a freshly dug grave. It clung to Naomi's hands, seeped into the coarse weave of her dress, a ghost scent that would follow her into the frozen dark. She poured the last of the can onto the dry kindling she had stacked for weeks in the wood box beside the hearth, a secret hoard of tinder-dry oak and fat lighter wood, each piece chosen with the care of a lover arranging a bridal bed. The fire in the great room fireplace was already roaring, a festive, hungry thing meant to ward off the New Year's Eve chill. Master Robert Carrington sat before it, his head lolled back against the damask wing chair, a half-empty glass of brandy tipped precariously in his slack hand. He was drunk. He was always drunk on the last night of the year, a sodden, sentimental tyrant toasting his own prosperity, a prosperity built on the backs and in the blood of people he owned, like furniture. The firelight danced on his slack face, turning the ruddy flesh to molten gold. He snored softly, a wet, rattling sound that filled the cavernous room. Naomi watched him, her heart a cold, still stone in her chest. There was no fear, not anymore. Fear had been burned out of her weeks ago, the day she saw the wagon carrying her Samuel away. His small face, a white blur of terror in the dusty rear window, his name, a silent scream on her lips. They had held her down, the overseer Pike and two of the field hands, their grunts of effort, mingling with her own raw, animal keening. Master Carrington had stood on the porch, watching, his expression one of mild annoyance, as if swatting at a bothersome fly. "He is a good boy," Carrington had said later, patting her shoulder with a hand that felt like a spider. "Nosh, strong stock. He'll fetch a fine price down in Louisiana. A new start for the lad, a new start." The words had been a key turning in a lock deep inside her, a lock that had held back a flood of pure black rage. Now, the flood was here. She dipped a twisted rag into the oil lamp on the mantelpiece, the flame catching with a greedy hiss. The smell of burning cloth joined the turpentine. For a moment she saw not the opulent room of her enslavement, but a memory, sharp and vivid as a shard of glass. Her own mother, years ago in a cabin that smelled of wood smoke and dried herbs, humming a low tune as she mended a shirt by candlelight. A simple, quiet love, a life, another world, stolen and sold. The lullaby was in her head now, a phantom tune. "Go to sleep, little one, stars are a-peeking." She had sung it to Samuel every night, his small, warm body curled against hers. The memory was a fresh wound. She fed the pain of it to the cold stone in her chest. She touched the flaming rag to the turpentine-soaked kindling. The whoosh of the ignition was a living thing, a sudden, violent breath. A wall of yellow-orange flame erupted from the woodbox, impossibly fast, impossibly hot. It licked up the dry paneling of the wall, devoured the heavy velvet curtains, tasted the priceless Aubusson rug. The heat slammed into her, a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. Carrington jerked awake, his eyes wide and uncomprehending. He saw the fire. Then he saw her, standing in the growing light, her face a mask of terrible calm. "Naomi?" His voice was a thick, confused croak. He tried to stand, stumbling, the brandy glass shattering on the flagstones. "What is this, devil-take? You, girl, what have you done?" She didn't answer. She only watched as the fire leaped from the rug to his chair, the damask turning black and then bright in an instant. He shrieked, a sound of pure, selfish terror, batting at the flames that climbed his legs. The smell of burning wool and singed hair filled the air, a foul counterpoint to the clean scent of pine. He was a pillar of fire, a screaming torch, staggering blindly toward the door. He never reached it. He collapsed in a heap, the flames consuming him, his final cry swallowed by the roar of the inferno. The fire was an animal now, chewing through the heart of the great house, its voice a symphony of cracking timbers and shattering glass. Upstairs, the mistress was screaming her husband's name. Naomi backed away, the heat scorching her face. She turned and ran, not through the front door, but through the servants' districts passage, past the kitchen where the other house slaves were just beginning to stir, their voices rising in alarm. She didn't look at them, she couldn't. This was her act, her sin, her salvation. She burst out the back door and into the bone-aching cold of the Virginia night. The sky was a black velvet cloth pricked with icy stars. Behind her, the Carrington plantation house was a blossoming flower of destruction, painting the night sky red. She ran for the woods, the frozen ground crunching under her bare feet, the lullaby a frantic, desperate prayer in her mind. "Go to sleep, little one. Mama is running." The smell of turpentine was on her skin, in her hair, in her soul. It was the scent of her freedom. Asterisk, asterisk, the world shrank to the burn in her lungs and the pain in her feet. The woods were a tangled maze of black trunks and skeletal branches that clawed at her face and tore at her thin dress. Every snap of a twig, every hoot of an owl, was the sound of pursuit. The dogs. They would send the dogs. She knew Pike's dogs, their slobbering jaws and merciless eyes. The thought sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through her. She had to find water. Water would hide her scent. She ran without direction, guided only by a primal instinct to put distance between herself and the roaring pyre that had been her prison. The cold was a physical enemy, seeping through the soles of her feet, turning her fingers and toes to numb, useless things. In her palm, she felt the faint, raised line of the scar, a delicate crescent moon. It was a gift from the mistress, from a day years ago when a porcelain teacup had slipped from her nervous fingers. The mistress's rage had been as hot and sharp as the shard she'd used to punish her. Now Naomi clenched her fist, the scar a hard knot, against her skin. It was a reminder, one of many. She stumbled upon a creek, its surface a thin, black mirror of the sky, crusted with ice at the edges. Without hesitating, she waded in. The shock of the water was like 1,000 needles stabbing into her legs. It stole her breath, made her gasp, but she pushed on, moving downstream, letting the current pull at her, wash her clean. Wash away the smell of turpentine and death. But it was inside her now, a memory burned into her senses. She followed the creek for what felt like miles, her body shaking uncontrollably, her teeth chattering so hard her jaw ached. Finally, when she could go no further, she dragged herself onto the opposite bank, collapsing into a heap of wet cotton and shivering flesh. She crawled into a thicket of rhododendron, their broad, leathery leaves offering a meager shield from the wind. There, curled into a tight ball, she listened to the sounds of the night. In the distance, faint and carried on the wind, she heard it. The baying. The dogs were on the hunt. Asterisk, asterisk. By dawn, the Carrington plantation was a scene from a Bosch painting. The great house was a blackened, smoldering skeleton, its chimneys standing like tombstones against a gray, unforgiving sky. A crowd had gathered, neighbors on horseback, their faces grim, house slaves huddled together, wrapped in blankets, their eyes wide with a mixture of terror and something else, something unreadable, and the field hands standing in silent, watchful lines. Elias Pike, the overseer, moved through the chaos like a bull, his face a thundercloud of fury. "Find her," he roared, his voice raw. "I want every inch of these woods searched. She can't have gone far. $100 to the man who brings her back alive. The master's brother will want his justice slow." The smoldering ruins were still too hot to enter, but they had found what was left of Robert Carrington near the doorway of the great room. It was not a body so much as a suggestion of one, a charred, blackened thing fused to the floorboards. The smell was stomach-turning. Later that morning, a carriage arrived, rattling up the long drive. A man stepped out, tall and impeccably dressed, despite the hour and the grim circumstances. This was Thomas Carrington, Robert's younger brother, a lawyer from Richmond. His face was pale, but composed, his eyes dark and intelligent. He surveyed the scene with a chilling lack of emotion, his gaze sweeping over the weeping mistress, the ruins of his family home, the assembled slaves. Pike approached him, hat in his hand. "Mr. Carrington, a terrible business. We're searching for the girl Naomi. She's the one. Disappeared right after it started." Thomas Carrington's eyes narrowed. "Naomi," he said, the name like a drop of ice. He walked to the edge of the ruin, staring into the smoldering heart of his brother's life. "Did she have a reason, Mr. Pike?" Pike shifted his weight. "Sir? She was a slave. They don't need reasons. They're like animals. You turn your back." "Don't insult my intelligence," Thomas snapped, his voice cutting through the morning air. "My brother was not a sentimental man. Did he sell someone? Punish someone?" Pike hesitated. He sold her boy, Samuel, about a month back, to a trader heading for the sugar parishes. Thomas Carrington nodded slowly, a dark understanding dawning in his eyes. He turned away from the house and walked toward his brother's office, a separate, smaller brick building that had survived the blaze. "Show me my brother's ledgers," he said. Inside, the office was pristine, a monument to order and control. Books lined the walls. A globe stood in the corner. On the heavy mahogany desk lay the plantation ledger, bound in thick leather. Thomas opened it, his long, pale fingers flipping through the pages. The handwriting was his brother's, a precise, elegant script that belied the brutal nature of the words it recorded. Page after page of cotton yields, equipment costs, and lists of names. Under the heading Inventory, Human Property, he found her. Naomi, female approx, 22 years. Seamstress, capable house servant. Strong constitution. Acquired from the estate of Jedediah Hale, 1827. Cost, $450. And below that, Nikes, Samuel. Male, 6 years. Son of Naomi. Sound limbs, quick. Sold to Mr. Silas Croft, trader, for transport to New Orleans. December 3rd, 1831. Price, $325. The cold, neat script, the finality of the entry. Thomas stared at it. This was the reason. Not madness, not animal impulse, a debt, paid in fire. He closed the book. "The bounty is not enough, Mr. Pike," he said, his voice quiet and deadly. "My brother's life is worth more than $100. I want a man who finds things that do not wish to be found. There is a tracker, they call him Silas Blackwood. He works out of Petersburg. Send a rider. Tell him the price is $500, and tell him I want the girl brought back to Richmond. The authorities will have their trial, but the family will have its satisfaction first." Pike's eyes widened at the sum. $500 was a fortune. It was enough to buy 2 slaves like Naomi. "Yes, sir," he said, "at once." Thomas Carrington stood alone in his dead brother's office, the ledger open on the desk. He saw the neat lines, the tidy columns, the world reduced to profit and loss, and in the precise, elegant curves of his brother's handwriting, he saw the seeds of a bonfire. Asterisked days bled into a week. Naomi moved only at night, a wraith flitting through the frozen landscape. Hunger was a constant, gnawing companion. She ate frozen berries, chewed on the inner bark of pine trees, once managed to trap a rabbit with a crude snare, tearing at its raw flesh with her teeth, her stomach roiling in protest. The cold was her tormentor and her ally. It sapped her strength, but it also kept the search parties from venturing too deep, their breath pluming in the air, their voices carrying for miles, giving her warning. She was heading north. She didn't know exactly where north was, only that it was away from the sun's weak daytime arc, guided by the fixed star her mother had shown her as a child. Asterisk, that one. There, asterisk, her mother's voice whispered in her memory. That's the drinking gourd star. You follow that, and it'll lead you to freedom. It had been a story then, a fantasy. Now it was the only map she had. Her dreams were a fever swamp of fire and fear. She would be back in the great room, the heat on her face, Master Carrington's screams echoing in her ears. Or she would be in a wagon, her son Samuel's face pressed against the back, his mouth open in a silent cry she could not hear. She would wake with a gasp, the lullaby caught in her throat, her hand clenched so tightly over the crescent scar that her palm bled. The smell of turpentine would be thick in her nostrils, so real she'd look at her hands, expecting them to be slick with it. One night, huddled in the hollow of a lightning-struck oak, she heard them. Not Pike's clumsy posse, but a more patient sound. A single horse, moving at a walk. The quiet jingle of a harness. She held her breath, pressing herself deeper into the tree. A figure passed through a moonlit clearing, a silhouette against the snow-dusted ground. A tall man on a dark horse, a long rifle resting in the crook of his arm. He didn't shout. He didn't rush. He moved with a slow, deliberate purpose, his head turning, scanning the woods, his senses seeming to taste the air. She felt a new kind of fear, colder and sharper than the fear of Pike's dogs. This was not a pursuer. This was a hunter. Asterisk, asterisk, Silas Blackwood, dismounted, his boots making no sound on the frosted earth. He knelt by the creek where Naomi had entered the water more than a week ago. Pike's men had trampled the area into a muddy mess, but Blackwood looked past the obvious. He saw with different eyes. He saw the faint scuff mark on a stone just under the water's surface, a place where a desperate stumbling foot might have slipped. He saw a single dark thread caught on a bramble bush 50 yards downstream on the opposite bank. A thread from a cheap linsey-woolsey dress, the kind issued to house slaves. He had spent 2 days not in the woods, but at the Carrington plantation. He'd ignored the smoldering ruin and gone straight to the slave cabins. He spoke to no one. He simply watched. He observed the spaces they lived in, the tools they used, the paths they walked. In Naomi's empty cabin, he found a small, crudely carved wooden bird, its wings half-finished. He found a hiding place under a loose floorboard where a few dried flowers were pressed between sheets of paper. He was not looking for a monster. He was looking for a woman. He needed to know how she thought, what she loved, what she feared. In Robert Carrington's office, he read the ledger entry about the sale of the boy Samuel. He noted the date. He understood. This was not a crime of opportunity. This was an execution. It had been planned. He saw the hoarded kindling, the stolen turpentine from the stables. It spoke of patience, of a cold, deep fury. Now, standing by the creek, he looked north. A runaway slave would almost always go north. But this one was different. She wasn't just running from something. She was running with the fire still inside her. He imagined her, cold and starving, but fueled by a righteous hate that was more potent than any food. "You're clever," he whispered to the empty woods, "but you're still bleeding." He meant her soul, not her body. He knew that a wound that deep always left a trail. He mounted his horse and turned it north, the single dark thread tucked safely in his waistcoat pocket. Asterisk, asterisk. Naomi learned the rhythm of the hidden world. She learned which roots were safe to eat, how to read the signs of a coming storm in the color of the sky, how to muffle the sound of her own breathing when danger was near. She moved through the land not as a trespasser, but as a ghost, leaving as little trace as the wind. Weeks after the fire, desperate and weak with hunger, She stumbled upon a small, isolated farmstead. Smoke curled from its chimney, a fragile ribbon against the gray sky. It was a Quaker settlement. She knew the stories, the whispers among the slaves of the quiet, plain-dressed people who believed owning another human was a sin against God. But she also knew that for every friendly face, there were a dozen who would turn her in for a few silver dollars. She watched the farm for 2 full days from a ridge, her stomach a hollow ache. She saw a man, a woman, and 2 small children. Their movements were calm and gentle. They spoke to their animals with a kindness she had never witnessed. On the 3rd night, driven by a hunger that was blurring her vision, she crept to the back of the house. A pie had been left to cool on the windowsill. The smell of apples and cinnamon was dizzying. It was a trap. It had to be. But her body betrayed her mind. Her hand reached out, trembling. The back door opened. The woman stood there, holding a lantern. She was not old, her face framed by a simple white bonnet, her eyes a clear, pale blue. She did not scream. She did not call for her husband. She simply looked at Naomi, at her torn dress, her scratched face, the wild, haunted look in her eyes. "Thee must be cold," the woman said, her voice soft as falling snow. Naomi froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was caught. It was over. The woman held out a hand. "Come inside. There is soup on the stove. No one will harm thee here." The simple, unadorned kindness was more disarming than any threat. Tears pricked Naomi's eyes, hot and sharp. She hadn't cried since Samuel was taken. She allowed the woman to lead her inside, into a kitchen that was warm and smelled of bread and safety. The woman, whose name was Sarah, gave her soup and thick slices of bread with fresh butter. She did not ask for Naomi's name or where she had come from. She simply tended to her, cleaning the cuts on her face and hands with a gentle touch, giving her a clean, simple gray dress to replace her tattered rags. For a few days, Naomi lived in a strange dream. She slept in a small attic room, warm under a thick quilt. She helped Sarah with chores, her hands remembering the rhythms of domestic work, but this time without the constant, oppressive weight of fear. She watched the family pray, their heads bowed in silent communion. They moved with a grace and peace that felt alien to her. But even in this sanctuary, she could not rest. The lullaby still haunted her sleep, and the smell of turpentine would sometimes rise in her memory, unbidden, making her flinch. One afternoon, Sarah's husband, John, came back from town, his face troubled. He handed Sarah a folded paper. It was a bounty poster. $500 reward, 9 wanted for arson and murder. Mon invade mentes a I. 9 wanted for arson and murder. 5 feet 4 inches in height, of slender build but strong. Complexion, medium brown. Speaks clearly. Has a notable scar, crescent-shaped, on the palm of her left hand. Last seen, fleeing the estate of the late Robert Carrington, Esquire, in Henrico County, on the night of December 31st, 1831. The Semper said Negress is cunning and dangerous. The above reward will be paid for her capture and vax. Delivery to the Richmond jail, or $300 for information leading to the same. Thomas Carrington, executor. Sarah read it, her face pale. She looked at Naomi, her blue eyes filled with a sad understanding. Naomi's left hand, the one with the crescent scar, flew to her side as if to hide itself. "He is a persistent man, this Thomas Carrington," John said quietly. "There is a tracker asking questions in every town. A man named Blackwood. They say he never gives up." "Thee must go," Sarah said, her voice choked with sorrow. "It is not safe for thee here any longer. Not for thee, nor for us." That night, they gave her a parcel of food, a heavier cloak, and a small amount of money. John drew her a crude map on a piece of parchment. showing her the safest routes north, pointing out the homes of other friends who might offer shelter. "Follow the river," he told her, "and may God's light guide thy steps." Sarah embraced her, a gesture so full of genuine warmth that Naomi stiffened, unused to such a touch. "Be careful, sister," she whispered. Naomi stepped back out into the cold, the brief interlude of peace already feeling like a distant dream. The hunt was still on. The man named Blackwood was out there, his shadow falling long and dark across her path. The scent of turpentine seemed to cling to the bounty poster, a permanent stain. She was no longer just a runaway. She was a murderer, with a price on her head. The crescent scar on her palm seemed to burn, a brand marking her for all to see. ***, Silas Blackwood found the Quaker farm 2 days after Naomi had left. He didn't barge in or make accusations. He came to the door asking for a drink of water, his demeanor polite and weary. He complimented Sarah on her garden, asked John about his crops. He was patient. He let the silence do the work for him. He saw the extra quilt airing on the line. He noticed the faint indentation of a head on the pillow in the small attic room he glimpsed through an open door. He smelled the lingering scent of lye soap, stronger than the usual household smells, as if someone had recently been washed clean of a long journey. As he was leaving, he paused at the door. "There's a runaway I'm searching for," he said, his voice casual. "A girl named Naomi. From the Carrington place. Set afire, they say." He watched their faces. He saw the flicker in Sarah's eyes, the tightening of John's jaw. Terrible business. Seems she had a child sold off her. Some people, when you push them too far, they don't break. They bite back. He looked directly at Sarah. "I don't suppose you've seen anyone lost? A soul in need of guidance?" John stepped forward, his body shielding his wife. "We see only the souls God puts in our path, sir, and we offer them comfort, not judgment." Blackwood nodded slowly, a small, cold smile touching his lips. "I'm sure you do." He tipped his hat and rode away. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. They had told him everything he needed to know. She had been here. She was rested, fed, and clothed. And she was heading north, following the river. He now had a fresh trail, and his quarry was no longer starving or desperate. She was healing. That made her more dangerous, more of a challenge. He spurred his horse, a renewed sense of purpose quickening his blood. The hunt was getting interesting. Asterisk. The James River was a wide, gray serpent, coiling its way through the winter landscape. Naomi followed its banks, using the crude map John had given her. The journey was a blur of cold, damp days and long, fearful nights. She avoided towns and main roads, sticking to the wilderness that bordered the water. She thought of Samuel constantly. Was he warm? Was he frightened? Did he cry for her at night? The questions were a form of self-torture, but she could not stop them. The lullaby was her constant companion, a sad, broken melody she hummed to herself. "Go to sleep, little one." But he wasn't sleeping. He was on a boat or a wagon, heading into a hell from which few returned. The fire had been for him. Everything was for him. It was the only thought that kept her moving forward. She found help along the way, in fleeting, furtive encounters. A free black ferryman who looked the other way and pulled her across a tributary without asking for a fare. An old woman living in a shack deep in the woods who shared her meager meal of corn pone and greens, her eyes full of ancient, knowing sorrow. They were whispers in the dark, nodes in a vast, secret network of defiance. They called it the Underground Railroad. It was not a railroad of iron and steam, but one of flesh and blood, of courage and risk, its tracks laid in the dark, its stations the hidden rooms and barns of brave men and women. But for every act of kindness there was the ever-present threat of betrayal. She saw the bounty posters in every hamlet she passed, her own face, crudely drawn, staring back at her. Cunning and dangerous. The words made her feel like a cornered animal. The scar on her hand became a source of constant anxiety. She took to wearing a strip of cloth wrapped around her left hand, hiding the telltale crescent. As she moved further north, spring began to touch the land. The iron-hard ground softened. The trees began to bud. The world was coming back to life, but Naomi felt as if she were still trapped in an endless winter. The hunter, Blackwood, was a constant presence in her mind. She felt his pursuit like a change in the air pressure, a cold spot on the back of her neck. She knew he was behind her, patient, relentless, drawing the net ever tighter. In a town just south of the Potomac, she saw him. She was gathering information, trying to find a safe way to cross the great river that separated Virginia from Maryland, slavery from a fragile, conditional freedom. She was on the edge of a market square, her face hidden by a deep bonnet given to her by the old woman, when she saw a tall man on a dark horse ride into town. He moved with the same unnerving stillness she had seen in the woods weeks ago. He dismounted and began to speak quietly to the constable, showing him a piece of paper. The bounty poster. Her heart seized in her chest. It was him. The man from the woods. Blackwood. He looked different in the daylight. His face was lean and weathered, his eyes a pale, washed-out gray, like a winter sky. They missed nothing. As he spoke, his gaze swept the square, a slow, methodical scan. For a terrifying second, his eyes met hers. She saw no flicker of recognition, but she felt seen, stripped bare. She turned away, her body rigid, and forced herself to walk, not run, into a crowded alleyway. She pressed herself against a cold brick wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps, the lullaby, a frantic, silent chant in her head. He was here. He was so close. The scent of turpentine filled her senses, choking her, the ghost of her crime rising up to claim her. Asterisk. Blackwood knew she was close. He could feel it. The trail had grown warm. A ferryman on the Rappahannock remembered a quiet, frightened woman with a bandaged hand. A shopkeeper in Fredericksburg recalled a woman matching her description buying a small loaf of bread with a coin he recognized as Quaker currency. She was moving north, but she was getting tired. He knew the toll a life on the run took, the constant vigilance, the lack of sleep, the poor food. It wore a person down, made them careless. He had the poster in his hand, but he already knew it by heart. It was the scar he focused on. Seemed notable scar, crescent-shaped, on the palm of her left hand. A unique marker, a key. He had questioned Thomas Carrington about it. The lawyer, in his cold, precise way, had explained. A teacup, dropped during service. His sister-in-law, a woman of delicate nerves and a short temper. An object lesson, he'd called it. Blackwood had seen 100 scars born of such object lessons. They were signatures of ownership, carved into the flesh. In the Playa Market Square, he had felt a flicker of something, a sudden tension in the crowd, a subtle shift of energy, like a deer sensing a wolf. He had scanned the faces, but saw only the usual mix of farmers, merchants, and slaves. But the feeling lingered. She was here, in this town. The hunt was nearing its end. He learned from the constable that a group of runaways was rumored to be attempting a crossing of the Potomac in 2 nights' time during a festival in the nearby town of Alexandria. There would be fireworks, music, and drunk patrols, the perfect cover for a desperate flight. The crossing point would be a treacherous spot known as the Narrows, where the current was swift and the banks were steep. Blackwood went to the stables, tended to his horse, and cleaned his rifle. He felt no malice toward the girl. He felt no pity either. She was his job, a puzzle to be solved. She had killed a man, burned his house to the ground. She had paid a debt. Now he was here to collect on another. He sat in the fading light, the scent of horse and leather around him, and waited for the night of the festival. Asterisk. The night was alive with noise. The distant pop and fizz of fireworks echoed across the water, painting the low-hanging clouds with brief, garish strokes of color. A brass band played a jaunty tune that was snatched away by the wind. On the Virginia side of the Potomac, in a secluded cove downstream from Alexandria, a small group of people huddled in the shadows. Naomi was among them. There were 7 in all, an old man with a hacking cough, a young couple clutching a sleeping baby, and 2 brothers barely more than boys. A guide, a free black man named Moses, spoke in a low, urgent whisper. "The boat is small. We cross in 2 trips. The current is strong tonight. The storm is coming. Do exactly as I say." The air was thick and heavy, charged with electricity. The wind was picking up, whipping the surface of the black water into a frenzy. Naomi's heart pounded in time with the distant music. Freedom was just across the river, a few hundred yards of churning water. She looked at her bandaged hand. The scar beneath it throbbed. She could almost smell the turpentine on the wind, a phantom carried from that New Year's night. Moses took the young couple and their baby first. Naomi watched the small boat, a dark shape struggling against the current, until it was swallowed by the darkness. She waited, the wind tearing at her cloak, the old man's coughing a grim counterpoint to the festive sounds. Fear and hope were tangled together inside her, a knot so tight she could barely breathe. Suddenly, a voice cut through the wind. "That's far enough." The voice was calm, conversational, and utterly terrifying. Silas Blackwood stepped out from behind a stand of river birches, his long rifle held loosely in his hands. He wasn't pointing it. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. The 2 young brothers froze. The old man let out a wheezing gasp. "Naomi," Blackwood said. It was not a question. His pale gray eyes found her in the gloom. "Thomas Carrington sends his regards." Naomi's blood ran cold. He had found her. After all these months, after all these miles, the hunt was over. But, as she looked at him, at this calm, implacable man who was the instrument of her return to bondage, something inside her shifted. The fear was still there, a cold snake in her belly, but the rage, the pure, clean rage from that fiery night, returned. It burned away the exhaustion and the despair. She thought of Samuel. She thought of the wagon, of the look on his face. She thought of the cool, precise handwriting in the ledger, consigning her son to a living death for $325. She would not go back. She would die first. She would die here, on the banks of this river, a free woman. "You tell Thomas Carrington," she said, her voice low and steady, shaking with a force that surprised her, "that I will see him in hell." Behind Blackwood, she saw movement. The ferryman, Moses, had returned. He stood on the bank, a heavy boat hook in his hand, his face a mask of grim determination. Blackwood heard him, turning slightly. It was the only opening they would get. The 2 brothers surged forward, tackling Blackwood around the legs. The old man, with a surprising burst of strength, swung a piece of driftwood at the rifle. The gun went off with a deafening crack, the shot going wild, whistling, into the night sky. The world exploded into chaos. Blackwood was strong, fighting off the brothers with brutal efficiency. Moses charged, the boat hook held like a spear. Naomi didn't wait. She ran. She ran for the water, for the dark, churning river that was her only escape. She heard a shout behind her, her name, cried out in Blackwood's voice. She plunged into the Potomac. The water was colder than the creek had been, a shocking, paralyzing cold that stole her breath and her strength. The current grabbed her, a powerful, invisible hand, pulling her down, dragging her out into the middle of the channel. She fought her way to the surface, gasping for air. The shore was a confusion of struggling silhouettes against the distant glow of the fireworks. She saw Blackwood, free of the brothers, standing at the water's edge, raising his rifle. The sky lit up with a burst of red and gold light, and in that brief, hellish illumination, their eyes met across the water. His face was unreadable. She saw the flash from the rifle's muzzle a split second before she heard the crack. Something burned across her shoulder, a searing line of fire. Then the current took her for good. She was pulled under, the black water closing over her head, the sounds of the world fading into a dull, rushing roar. Her lungs screamed for air. The lullaby filled her mind, no longer a song of comfort or sorrow, but a final, fading echo. Go to sleep, little one. The water was a cold, dark blanket, wrapping her in its final embrace. The crescent scar on her hand, the smell of turpentine, the face of her son, it all dissolved into the blackness. Asterisk, Silas Blackwood stood on the riverbank, the rain beginning to fall, washing the smoke from the air. The brothers and the old man had vanished into the woods. The ferryman was gone, his boat already lost in the darkness. Blackwood lowered his rifle. He had aimed to wound, not to kill, to wing her, make her easy to retrieve. But the current was too strong, the night too dark. He watched the spot where she had gone under for a long time, but the river gave up nothing. He had lost her. He returned to Richmond a week later. Thomas Carrington received him in his pristine law office. "The body?" Carrington asked, his voice sharp. "The river took her," Blackwood said. "She's gone." Carrington's eyes were chips of ice. "Did you see her die?" "I saw her go under. In the Narrows, in a storm. No one could survive that." Carrington stared at him for a long moment, then walked to his desk and unlocked a drawer. He counted out $300. "This was the price for information," he said, pushing the stack of bills across the desk. "The full $500 was for her delivery. You failed." Blackwood looked at the money, then at the lawyer. He took the bills, folded them, and placed them in his coat. He did not feel like a failure. He felt empty. The hunt was over. The puzzle was solved, but the final piece was missing, lost to the river. He turned and walked out of the office, leaving Thomas Carrington alone with his cold, incomplete justice. No body was ever recovered from the Potomac. The official record listed Naomi as deceased, drowned while resisting capture. The Carrington fire became a local legend, a cautionary tale told by masters to frighten their slaves. But among the enslaved another story was whispered. A story of a woman who walked out of a fire and into a river, a woman who paid the price for her child's freedom with flames, and was baptized into a new life by the Sauk water. They said she had not drowned, but that the river had carried her north, to a place where she could finally be free. They said that on New Year's Eve, if you stood by the ruins of the old Carrington place, you could sometimes catch the faint smell of turpentine on the wind. Epilogue, 1888, A young man named Julian Hayes sat in the archives of the Virginia Historical Society, dust motes dancing in the single beam of sunlight, slanting through the high, arched window. He was a journalist, a collector of what he called the people's history, the unwritten folklore and forgotten stories of the Commonwealth. For months, he had been chasing a ghost, a story he'd first heard from an old woman in a freedman's town near Petersburg. The story of a slave girl who'd burned her master alive on New Year's Eve, more than 50 years ago. He had finally gained access to the Carrington family papers, a dusty collection of letters and ledgers donated by a descendant. He spent days poring over the brittle pages, the elegant, spidery script telling a story of commerce, politics, and the casual brutality of everyday life on a plantation. He found the ledger entry for Naomi and her son Samuel. The cold finality of it chilled him. Then, tucked into a bundle of letters from Thomas Carrington to his wife, he found one dated 1852, 20 years after the fire. It was mostly concerned with legal matters, but one paragraph stood out. "I had a strange report from an associate in Philadelphia this week. He was attending a meeting of an abolitionist society, for his own research, of course, and mentioned our family's tragedy. An elderly negress at the meeting overheard him. She later approached him and told him a story. She spoke of a woman she knew, a seamstress, in the city named Rose, who had come from Virginia years ago. This Rose was a quiet woman, kept to herself, but was known for her fierce devotion to the cause of freeing our slaves. The old woman said that Rose never wore gloves, even in winter, but that she always seemed to be hiding her left hand in the folds of her dress. One day, the old woman saw it by accident. On the palm of her left hand, she said, was a scar, a perfect white crescent moon. Julian Hayes read the paragraph again, his heart beating faster. Rose. A new name, a new life. It was just a rumor, a second-hand story in a faded letter. It was not proof, but it was a flicker of light in a long, dark tunnel. Later that week, while researching folk music of the period, he came across a collection of slave spirituals and work songs gathered by a traveling preacher in the 1840s. One song caught his eye. The melody was noted as being a common, simple lullaby tune, but the words were different. They were darker, fiercer. "Hush now, baby, don't you cry, * masters sleep in the fire high. Hush now, darling, close your eyes, * freedom's comin' in the smoky skies. Go to sleep, little one, stars are a-peeking, *. The North Star's bright, a new life you're seeking." It was the lullaby. Transformed, the song of a mother's love had become an anthem of rebellion, a myth whispered from one generation to the next. The woman named Naomi was gone, drowned in the Potomac, a footnote in a dusty ledger. But her story, her act of impossible defiance, had survived. It had become a song, a legend, a ghost. Julian Hayes leaned back in his chair, the scent of old paper and ink filling his nostrils. The historical record was a weapon, he thought, wielded by the powerful to write their own truths, to erase the inconvenient, to silence the vanquished. The official story was of a slave, a crime, and a punishment delivered by the indifferent justice of a river. But history is not only what is written down, it is also what is remembered, what is sung in the dark, what is whispered in defiance of the silence. Somewhere, in the unwritten, unknowable past, a woman may have walked out of a river, her left hand forever clenched into a fist, hiding a crescent moon scar. She may have learned to live with the phantom scent of turpentine, the ghost of a lullaby, and the burning memory of a son she had sacrificed everything to avenge. Her fate remains ambiguous, lost in the mists of time, because in the end, her survival was not the point. Her resistance was. In the absence of a final entry in a master's ledger, she had, perhaps, found the only true freedom that was ever available to her, the freedom to become a story. And stories, unlike bodies, can never be truly owned or entirely killed. They burn, they drift, and they find new places to take root, forever haunting the landscape of memory.